Representative Lujan, thank you for joining us. Oh, she's connected to audio.
Yeah, looks like she's still connecting to video. Welcome in, Jeff. Thank you.
Yeah, she's coming here. Jeff's early, looking dapper. Oh, you should be wearing that hat. There you go.
I was just wearing that hat downtown. It's cold today.
Yeah, it's quite breezy.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're not storming the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, right?
That's the Colorado Capitol. It's a peaceful place to be. When I was with the cabinet, we got a little private tour up there one day.
Very nice.
So that's a picture of my private tour. Let's see. Am I running my own slides?
If you have them, it's easier.
Yep. I would love to. I'm going to spend a minute. I'm going to shut down here and go make sure I have the right version off of our shared drive. So talk to you in a few minutes.
And
okay,
Colin,
thanks, Jeff.
I sent you the agenda slides again. I'm sorry that they didn't get attached. Do you want me to just put up mine?
Yeah, let me make sure that you can. I need to enable you as a co-host, I think. Okay.
This is what it's going to look like.
Welcome in, Madam Chair.
Oh, well, thank you. Here, I'm telling you, welcome back. So, Art, great slides.
Oh, thank you. A little bit too much. I'm going to have to talk fast. But thankfully, some of it's covered by GridWorks too, so I won't have to repeat.
Well, don't talk too fast. You sort of talk fast anyway.
Yeah, I know.
I think the slides are great, Art.
Okay, this is great. All right, so this is what we're looking at. All right, I'll just stop sharing for now. And you have Colorado behind you, Commissioner?
Hello, Madam Chair.
I do. Who asked me that, Art or Jeff?
No,
That was Art.
Yes, that's Abrams Peak in Ouray, Colorado.
Beautiful.
Is that a favorite spot?
What did you say, Jeff?
Is that a favorite spot of yours?
Well, we have a place there. My husband grew up there, and he and his brother inherited the folks' place. So we go there every now and then. So that's just a nice view from the porch.
Great.
Yeah.
Beautiful. You know, you got it. You're showing loyalty to the neighboring state there.
Oh, very much. You know, when we left law school in California and came back to New Mexico, I said, why don't we go to California? I mean, to Colorado. Let's move to Colorado. I don't want to live in New Mexico. I want to live in Colorado.
Yeah.
But he said, well, we'd have to live in Denver to get the jobs. So
Yeah, true.
I don't want to do it.
I think you made a good choice.
You do, huh?
So you live in a beautiful spot, though.
Oh, I tend to agree. And frankly, I really appreciate the weather in Albuquerque, too. When I drive up to Santa Fe, I just get chilly and I won't stop. Where do you live in Colorado?
I'm right. I'm at the old airport, for the former airport area on the east side of Denver. So I've been on the east side of Denver for 41 years now, ever since college. Ever since we left, we snuck out of Michigan when Michigan's auto industry was suffering in 1980, 81. So it's been a while.
Good move.
It's kind of home.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole area around, I guess it's Loveland now, has grown so much. I mean, even in the last 10 years, I'm always amazed when I go through there.
Yeah, it's a little bit too much. You don't go up the mountains on a winter weekend on a Friday afternoon, or try and come home on a Sunday afternoon if you want, unless you like spending a lot of time in your car.
I'm gonna get off for a minute, guys. I'll be right back.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was Amanda joining us, Jeff?
Amanda will be late. Matthew will be joining us. Amanda is going to join us a little late. Okay. Matthew will be here, I believe, but I'll just kind of go start to finish, and we're going to use the same slide deck basically as the presentation of the commissioners. Obviously, making a few adjustments of things we've learned since then, but and I'm just going to accelerate through the middle section because. Tell me, this is a workshop of folks interested in helping the commission move toward actual rule language. Is that a fair premise?
We hope, yeah. And I tried to set this up so that we have discussion with each part, and especially my part.
Excellent.
Because, you know, it's still the distinction between grid modernization planning and distribution planning is a little fuzzy for the commission.
Sure. I bet.
I don't know what to say. It's pretty unlikely that we're going to get a rule out under this commission, but we're laying the groundwork for the next guys.
Exactly. Yeah. Sitting here in the first week in November. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, we have so much that still has to get done. I mean, it's like.
Right. And that's one of our messages from GridWorks too, is that even if you do make success, you got to see this as a ongoing iterative process that you should never expect you really finish, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah. And that even when, you know, when I was on the Colorado Commission or staffing the commission, we had just an understanding that every resource plan finished with a then redo of the rule before the next resource plan. That was just life. And so we updated the resource plan rules every 4 years. And there's a rhythm to this that won't be quite like that yet, but there's a kind of a version of that where as soon as you get this working well, you then have to figure out, well, what does that mean to your resource planning? What does that mean to electrification? What does that mean to distribution system planning? All those things.
Yeah, our new IRP is on a 3-year cycle. I mean, it's really just dealing with the big three.
Yeah, and I'll touch on that too, that notion that at a minimum, starting to practice sharing data between different dockets. And how do you look at outputs of one docket as deliberate and explicit inputs to another docket? So we'll try and touch on that too.
Okay, so Colin, aside from YouTube, are we recording the Zoom?
Yes, we're going to record, but I'm going to wait until 1 o'clock.
Okay.
We have one in the waiting room right now. I'm expecting about 24.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, you know, we've had workshops with as many as 120 people, but
Wow.
we never know how many people are watching it on YouTube.
True. And this is a similar audience to what was at our GridMod webinars, probably?
Broader than that. I mean,
Okay.
we sent it out to the interconnection rulemaking and to the, I believe the IRP rulemaking and.
Oh, excellent.
You know, so, you know, I mean, it's a small community here, but it's getting more attention all the time. So there is overlap. I think the community solar participants also got it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's the way you want it.
Okay, excuse me a second, guys.
Mhm.
I'm going to try and take notes when other people are talking, but
Same, Art.
yeah.
Okay, the YouTube link has been posted, Miguel says. Welcome in, Mr. Morris, Mr. D'Antonio. Art, you look like you're in the witness protection program.
Yeah.
Okay. Jeff, I've made you a co-host as well, so you can share your slides.
I don't know why
Thank you very much.
my slides are.
Welcome in, Ms. Burns. We have Mr. Turner. Our newest lawyer, Office of General Counsel. Welcome in, Robert. Okay, so we have about a
Mhm.
dozen. I think we need about a dozen more, including our presiding officer, Chair Hall. There's Matthew.
I don't know how to get rid of the sidebar.
Oh, you see on the bottom right, there's a red bar. There's a little thing that looks like an easel just to the left of that. Just to the left of that slider. Yep, that's your
But then it
presentation there.
disappears. There we go. No, still there.
Huh.
There. Can you see the whole slide?
Yep. No sidebar. Hi, Judy.
Hello. How are you?
Good. Welcome in.
Thank you. How many do we have? Oh, 13. Good. And I'm sure a few more.
Yeah, I think we're expecting at least 2 dozen.
Oh, excellent.
Mhm.
Commissioner Hall
Yeah.
said she would be running it.
I'm here.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Oh, hello.
Hi. Wow, you say two, yeah, we got now 16. Just popped ahead.
Yeah, 20 is the magic number, really.
Is that what really makes you want to
Great.
talk?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome in, Ty.
20. We're at 20. Art, you're going to dazzle us.
Okay. We still have people coming in the waiting room, so I'll give it a minute.
Yeah.
Okay, I see Kevin from the AG's office.
Andrew Stone, you have such a nice smiling picture. I almost thought it was a live Andrew.
I'm very, very still.
Very what? Smiley?
I'm very still.
Oh, you're very still. Very still.
Okay, it looks like we have a good participation level. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this workshop event on the prospects for grid modernization rulemaking at the New Mexico PRC. I'm Arthur O'Donnell. I am a U.S. Department of Energy solar innovator for the next month, and then I will just be a regular old citizen. We have a disclaimer that this is being conducted to introduce information, concepts, proposals for consideration in a future notice of proposed rulemaking for implementation of the Grid Modernization Act, AB 233. Commission members may be in attendance and are welcome to ask questions to the speakers. Any statements by participants are based on incomplete information, are not to be considered final positions of parties making them. They're really guideposts for determining additional information needs. While this does occur within the docket, which is 22-00089 UT, that's more of an inquiry docket rather than an actual rulemaking. So we're trying to break down the barriers and get discussion about ideas. So thank you all for joining us. This is what our agenda will look like for today. We're pleased to have Commission Chair Cynthia Hall with us, and she'll give some introductory remarks. GridWorks is a consultant that's been working with the PRC for the last 2 years, and over the course of the last year, had been conducting a series of webinars about grid modernization issues. Many of the folks who are joining us today participated in those webinars, and GridWorks gave a presentation to the commission a couple of weeks ago. And we're really kind of reviewing that presentation with a little bit more information. And Jeff Ackerman is going to lead that discussion. But Matthew Tisdale, the executive director, and Amanda Ormond, who's also a consultant for GridWorks, will be joining us. I'm going to take a chunk of time, kind of in the middle of the program, to present some straw proposals for what would go into a rulemaking and grid modernization planning. So this I hope to have a significant discussion about, and not to take much more than 45 minutes, because we have some really interesting presentations about the opportunities for access to federal funds for grid mod. And Jacqueline Waite from Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Division is going to join us and talk about a proposal that they have already submitted to the Department of Energy. And then in October, the commission issued a bench order, or essentially a data request, to the utilities about what their possible plans are for responding to Department of Energy funding opportunities. And in particular, we have Public Service New Mexico, Southwestern Public Service, Excel, who had a lot of really good information. And I have some updated information that I'll also supply. Finally, we're going to have a presentation and discussion from New Mexico Representative Tara Lujan, who represents parts of Santa Fe, about what she's thinking about in terms of prospective grid modernization legislation in the upcoming session. I think that you'll find that very interesting. And then finally close out with, kind of like how we can move forward with this, given the change in the commission and the constantly evolving field that we find ourselves in. Like, who would have thought a year ago that there would be literally hundreds of billions of dollars of federal money available for these purposes, right? So that a lot of things are changing, and in 2 years that money might not be available. So what do we do about that? So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Hall right now and stop sharing. Commissioner Hall.
Thank you, Art. So, as Art said, this is a workshop, and we're very glad to have all you people here. Now we have 31 participants. We were watching the number grow. And we've had workshops all year long, and last year too, as many of you know, associated with rules that we've been developing over that time period to help support the energy transition as our state goes forward with it, as the PRC goes forward with implementing it. And as Art said, we really appreciate you being here. What I really appreciate is your willingness to continue to come to these workshops and give us your precious time. And I do hope you continue to participate with us in the future. I was thinking about how we've felt like we've made such an effort in this commission to get these rules in place so that the next commission can take the ball and run with it. But as I reflect on the future, I think we'll certainly find ourselves needing changes maybe to these rules as time goes by, or maybe additional rules. And certainly things always change. And future commissions are going to have to be ready for that. And I think one thing that provides continuity is the collective reflections and contributions from a group of people like you. Many of you have been, litigating before the commission for years, and others of you are just interested people or other professionals that are in this energy realm in different roles. But every one of you has a contribution to make with your thoughts and your perspectives on what our future should look like. And to the extent you want to devote yourself to the minutia and the details and the consideration of this plan or this definition or that definition. Everything you say matters. We at the commission are just the, I don't want to say choke point, but we're the place where all this information has to funnel for us to, generate rules, decisions, and all the regulatory paraphernalia that has to occur to help the utilities get the guidance they need to go forward, set the guardrails, open the doors for them sometimes. So you guys matter. And I just want to express deep appreciation for your participation, because I don't think we could develop the quality regulations that we have without you. I know we couldn't. We just couldn't happen without all of you here. So thanks very much for all your contributions. And I personally am very excited that we're working on this particular rule, because it feels like a culmination of, certainly the work we've done in the interconnection rulemaking, and honestly, a lot of the work in the community solar rulemaking, and it also, has a nexus with our integrated resource plan. So rule. So I'm really excited that we've gotten to this point. I know this is just the beginning of the process of the grid mod rule and the whole grid mod support structure, regulatory support structure. That's going to have to be worked out over the next several years. So it's really just the beginning of it, but mine's bent to this issue, and I look forward to hearing everybody's comments today and seeing the valuable information that comes out of it all. So with that, I'll cede the floor back to Arthur so we can get down to the work. And thanks so much.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I do want to reference that Commissioner Steve Fishman is with us, and he's on mute. I don't know if he wants to say anything. He'll mostly be in listen mode. Yes, he's and if he might take his guitar off the wall and play when he gets really bored. But with that, we're going to move on to the next part of the program, which is GridWorks. And I already referenced what GridWorks has been doing with the Commission for the past 2 years, helping to facilitate the interconnection rule and the advanced inverter technical working group, but especially their help in bringing together a lot of ideas about grid modernization and bringing in national experts through their series of webinars has been really very helpful. And Jeff Ackerman is going to take the lead on this, but I do want to mention that Matthew Tisdale is also with us. So Jeff, I think that you have the floor, and I see your slides.
Thanks, Art. Yes, as mentioned, Matthew Tisdale's with me. I believe Amanda Orman will join us as well shortly when she's available. Pleasure to be with you all again. Chair Hall, Commissioner Fishman, good to see you again. GridWorks is an organization that some of you are familiar with from our work with you, and I recognize some of your names from our time together in our webinar series. But just to make sure all of you understand GridWorks and the context of which we are engaged with the PRC on this and the other dockets and projects that are mentioned, I would start by just pointing out our vision, our motivation as a nonprofit mission-driven organization is both that decarbonization of the economy is both critical and achievable. That's what drives us, and that what we bring to this effort is our service toward that vision is our work in convening, educating, empowering stakeholders, as we did in this grid mod process over the past year. So it's with that context that I'll also just quickly note as well that the report that's now available and this presentation is all conclusions and recommendations that are our perspective, our professional perspective at GridWorks. So we just draw that to your attention. That's our point of view that we're sharing, and we're proud of that, but just want to make sure it's clear whose ownership and whose voice is being articulated to you today. And with that, just mention, this is the team that you interacted with if you were with us during this whole journey through our online webinar series through the better part of 2022. Our Executive Director, Matthew Tisdale, Deborah Shields, Amanda Orman, and myself. And so, again, pleasure to be with you or introduce ourselves to you if that's the first time. With that, let me provide a high-level overview of where we're going to take you in my time with you this afternoon. I'm going to come back to another version of this slide shortly, but first, just to draw your attention that the heart of the presentation is going to articulate that from GridWorks, our message is that the PRC, the New Mexico Public Regulatory Commission, has the authority and the directive here to issue a notice of proposed rulemaking. And we lay out 5 particular subparts of what should be looked at inside of that rulemaking. Just to draw that to you at a high level now, and I'm going to come back to this deliberately later and talk you through those 5 points in terms of we offer this as really this premise that you are on the path now to rule language. And as Art mentioned earlier in the opening remarks, this in and of itself is not a notice of proposed rulemaking, but that's where we're heading toward, that's where the PRC is heading toward. So it's in that context that we offer some content and some structure and some guidance and recommendations. We'll get back to that soon. First, just to let you know as well, and Art made reference to this, is that same background of understanding what statutes are driving this, what we gain from those statutes, what work has already been done through the good work of the New Mexico state government, particularly at MNERD and their GridMod advisory group. And that a lot can be drawn from the white papers, the roadmap and the like there. And what has been established there offers additional content and substance for this process here. You are also familiar, if you joined us in this webinar series, of just what we took on from February through earlier this summer and into the fall, is this approach to a stakeholder engagement process, the number of workshops, how we went about that process, the use of experts, bringing in our task being to best facilitate an interaction between you as stakeholders, you as regulated jurisdictional utilities, and the various expertise that's available in the US and beyond, and to draw on other organizations that represent the stakeholder community here in New Mexico. That's the work we took on, proud of that, and it's based on that work that we speak to you today regarding recommendations. And one other just quick piece to bring to your attention. These next handful of slides are just a quick review and to let you know this is in the record, and it just captures what we shared together through that webinar process, starting from the broad understanding of integrated distribution planning or distribution system planning and how that's happening around the country and what we can gain from that, to understanding one of the first critical steps in moving toward a modernized grid is understanding and leveraging and implementing advanced metering. Art, in his remarks during the webinar series, spoke very particularly about this and what could be done in the near term. That's an integral step, but it's a step, but it's not the complete step to grid modernization. We also reflected on the increasing level of sort of complexity and sophistication that comes in this world of grid modernization, especially when you now start to understand how to look at load forecasting at the distribution level, resource forecasting. Many of the skills that the jurisdictional utilities have very well developed at the generation level now come to bear upon this area as well, and what's happening and what the state of art is and what can be learned in that sequence and context as well. Then you even add to this terminology that's somewhat new to this world of grid mod, but these are the moving pieces that make this all come to life. Hosting capacity analysis, for example, and understanding just what exactly is hosting capacity analysis, how it offers value to this process, how it offers value to the pursuit of distributed energy resources, DERs, how it then brings to life much more sophisticated distribution planning over time, and how you can even make sure that the full dynamism of having distributed resources on your grid and is fully leveraged into the truly modern grid that we're talking about here. Took us as well into this other language of non-wires alternatives or non-wires solutions. How do you kind of move into yet another level of complexity of looking at things that are capital-based and things that are not capital-based, and comparing different approaches to solving distribution system problems and different distribution system opportunities, both in the context of what the distribution system needs, what customers desire, but what the overall utility system is striving to become in this modernized grid world, interacting with generation, with transmission, and with the whole spectrum of what's happening in the system there. then once you have that as a context, you then realize that even takes you into other worlds now, such as the fact, and New Mexico's right in the thick of this as well, of how to embrace and best manage and working with the electrification of the transportation sector and what that means to customers, to the grid, to utilities, and how that interacts with this. And then that brought us around to the critical lessons of all of this at the heart of what regulatory process is all about, is making solid, substantive, defensible decisions. And a lot of that comes down to understanding the costs and the benefits, understanding cost effectiveness, the different tools that can be used in cost effectiveness, the need for consistency in choosing tools, and the need for understanding the pros and cons of different tools and what they offer and don't offer to the decision-making process. That's all offered as background to you. I put that all in there just to remind you again, we shared all that at some length with the commission a couple of weeks back, 19th of October, I think that was. But now back to the heart of what I want to share with you the rest of my time here, and brings you back to the slide I showed with you earlier. And that is that we start with that critical premise that the PRC has explicit statutory authority, has the informational background informed by the statutory directives, what MNERD and others have added to the record and to the context that you're working in to pursue a notice of proposed rulemaking as it pertains to grid modernization. And in that our recommendations and conclusions are to point out the discrete pieces to pursue in that process, starting first with realizing that in doing such, that all good rulemaking starts with a statement of goals and principles. That will help as a touchstone to come back to in other parts of the rule, articulating the sort of a statement of intent that's similar to you see in statutes. Statutory intent, this is sort of the rule intent, and then also guides the process from there on out. The heart of this recommendation goes to grid modernization plans and the call that utilities should be directed through this rule to file grid modernization plans. And from there, the understanding of what planning offers as opposed to the filing of applications, not in lieu of applications, but as a prerequisite to the filing of applications. And then once that planning context is set forth and the call for the filing of plans is to dive down into what makes that process work well. And that is to specify from the voice of the commission how a plan will be evaluated and the criteria and process by which a plan will be approved or rejected, so that it's clear to the applicant, to the jurisdictional utility, what is expected of them and what they can expect from the commission when it goes about reviewing and approving the plan through the presumably litigated process of a adjudicated proceeding on that plan application. From there, it's important to add additional context that grid modernization is a process here of implementing the policies of the statutes, and that in this decision-making process of the role of the commission is not to look at this as fully as a standalone, but that what happens here relates to other proceedings. And it's important as utilities, commission staff, other advisors, and other stakeholders engage, is to realize that to keep your eye open to the notion that what comes out of this proceeding or what could be brought into this proceeding explicitly relates to other proceedings. The first obvious example is how resource planning and grid modernization planning interact or should interact, how data can be shared between proceedings as well. And to see these things as all parts of a greater whole of a more complex and more dynamic approach to commissions interacting with utilities to carry out the fully modernized grid. And then to realize that even the best of processes will not be perfect. And to go into this realizing that you're starting a cycle here, you're starting to turn the wheel, and that what comes out of this, even a great rule, should be anticipated that X number of years down the road, that the rules would be revisited and improved based on experience. And that is something that should be, if not in the actual rule language, is an understanding of what you're taking on here and going forward. Now to those 5 specific pieces, a little more detail on each. First here, to speak to goals and principles. What we want to draw to your attention on behalf of GridWorks is, when thinking about goal and principle language, is to articulate that this is an investment in the future, that there's a policy implementation effort. So it's the commission and stakeholders helping the commission not set policy, but to capture what you know from the statutory language and what it is directing to be done here regarding reliable, affordable, secure grid of the future, but that it's also pursuing a clean system, and you're leveraging technology and systems and processes, just to capture that in the language that is, in effect, the preamble. Then the need to set a regulatory vision as well, and that notion I was just speaking to, of coordinating the actions of different proceedings. So to realize that proceedings will become more interactive with each other, and how you capture that as a explicit kind of goal and principle of how you're approaching this task. And then these last two on this list really speak to the relationship between the commission and the regulated utility, and to capture and find that appropriate balance between the commission embracing its responsibility and its task here to bring forth this modernized grid, but at the same time to realize that utilities seek predictability, because predictability helps them gain the confidence needed to make the investment decisions and the plans that we're calling for in grid modernization plans. So that should be reflected in criteria. That should be reflected in the choice of and the articulation of cost effectiveness criteria, and the other criteria we'll speak to a little later, and to find the appropriate place of flexibility that recognizes within reason what is unique about a utility and its jurisdiction or its circumstances, while holding to those certain principles reflected in items 1 and 2 to find where should a utility be provided appropriate flexibility in what's called upon in their filings. Next, to this notion of filing grid modernization plans, which, as I mentioned before, is really the heart of what is talked about in our recommendations and conclusions based on the webinars and our engagement with all of you and what we shared a few weeks ago with the Commission. This idea to call for grid modernization plans and themselves to be filed. This sets context so that when the applications are filed afterwards, there is a relationship here that makes both work most effectively. The way we present this to you is the notion being that a plan focuses on both the components and on how the components are going to interact with each other. Applications will later get to the components, but this is saying up front, show the Commission how those components are going to be brought into a more dynamic, more modernized system. What is the anticipated sequence of those components? In terms of that's the first step, thus is this create this comprehensive plan. It is that plan that then shows all the pieces and can refer back to. What you get in terms of a benefit here is you get a greater sense of clarity, a greater sense of transparency, so that the Commission, the intervening parties, as well as in relationship with the utility who files the plan, understand how that utility looks at the various and multiple moving pieces of a modernized grid. And back to that notion of flexibility and uniqueness, what does that utility see as the proper sequence of those pieces, of which ones should be pursued first if they are not, because it's not feasible to think all parts of a modernized grid will show up all at once. And then what it also offers is this notion of process improvement. And by that, as a student of management, as someone who's been around commissions for many years, what really is the immediate benefit here is that once you've put the hard work into having a plan prepared, having a plan adjudicated, and a plan modified if necessary and approved, it should make the applications that come in subsequent of the discrete pieces a relatively more simple, direct, straightforward proceeding in and of itself, because as to the degree that application is within what the plan called for, that should offer a lot of framing already for considering and tending to approve the application. Because now you're just, although just is a big step there, down to the actual costs and any other nuances that have happened from the plan to the application. But that is similar, a lesson learned from resource planning, at least in my home state of Colorado, that once you put the heavy lift into putting together a comprehensive resource plan, then future filings of generation, for example, become a relatively simple thing in pursuing a certificate of public convenience and necessity. There's an equivalent lesson to be learned here in grid plans and distribution level investments. And so that's the key message to keep in mind in thinking through. And there's a lot of work to do between what's said here on the screen and turning it into rule language, because what's really called for is then to say, how exactly does the rule articulate what is a grid modernization plan? a place to start with that is to work backwards from how will that plan be evaluated. Again, New Mexico has a good fortune to be able to leverage off of statutory language. The first 8 bullets shown to you here come from House Bill 233, and now codified into statute. And so working off of that language there, of those 8 criteria, gives a good starting place for the language of the rule itself. It's up to the commission working with stakeholders in the utility to see to the items, especially you see highlighted in darker font, is there sufficient understanding of what that word or term means? How will it be presented inside of the rule and inside of the application of a plan, the filing of a plan? What is meant by clean energy? What is meant by transparent? And how will that be expressed in the particulars of the rule language that says this part of a plan will contain the following documents or address the following questions, et cetera. That's the way to think about this. The part starred at the bottom is highlighted deliberately to bring to your attention that it's separate from what you see in 233, goes back to that last slide I shared with you earlier from our webinar series and what we learned about cost evaluation methods. And the key takeaway here is to realize what we learned in that webinar, the criticality of understanding how cost evaluation is integral to this entire process of looking at what's filed and making substantive decisions on those filings, and realizing that when and where you use least cost best fit versus total resource cost, and the virtues and benefits and limitations of both, holding true to the notion that when you're talking about what I mentioned earlier, distributed energy resources or non-wire solutions, that the critical lesson here that came from the expertise we brought in is the need for consistency. If nothing else, that you have to, and that's back to sort of helping utilities themselves have that sense of confidence that there is a consistency of process by using the consistency of cost evaluation methods across those spectrums of DERs or non-wire solutions and the like. But understanding that there's value in both approaches, to understand those approaches, and then to put the hard work into deciding what should be called for inside of the plan, because the plan should give the utilities perspective and how they see that their plan matching to these cost evaluation methods to the degree that the plan speaks to discrete costs or not. If not, how that'll be applied to applications filed subsequent to the plan. A lot of good work was done in the webinar there. A lot of work yet to be done in there. So keep that in mind. There's a substantive part of a solid rule is reflected in cost evaluation. And then to that next piece that was shared in our high-level recommendations and conclusions is this notion that this is the heart of doing good state-of-the-art 21st century regulation. And that is to realize that there are several things going on at once and that this regulatory process doesn't just stop when something else comes to it from the legislature. There's many years as a commission chair, I wished it would, but you've got to kind of keep all the proverbial plates spinning while doing the good work of the commission that is called upon day in and day out, while realizing there is new work and new structure to put in place. And so that new structure comes first by embracing this grid modernization rulemaking, as we're talking about. It also is a realization in the second column that you can't stop what's already in front of the commission, but there's a reasonable expectation that something filed gets fully adjudicated and resolved. But then to the degree that the commission can look at what's down the road that hasn't happened yet and call for a bit of a reasonable timeout so that step one, that grid modernization rule can really have an impact, is to say, unless there are true emergency situations where the grid needs an immediate investment, to suspend the filing of actual grid modernization projects until the plan framework has been filed, has been adjudicated, and has been put in place, which is step 4, is that's the rule, the filing of plans, and then those plans become adopted by the commission, and then the utility moves forth on that. And then that's how you get your sequence in place, and that commissions take and embrace the leadership they have in these circumstances to put an order to this process here and do good, active case management, as we often called it in other proceedings. And then that allows you to then have grid mod in place, prepare for the applications that come forward, and then realize that that is, as I mentioned earlier, just the start of the sequence of several things happening from there, which is really the 5th column. is that you now start to see that you rest on that accomplishment, but then you take a breath and move into what comes next. You start to embrace the other pieces, forecasting of DERs, how this matches into the IRP process, how EVs as planning takes place there, or just as the market adapts, modifies everything we're talking about, and how all this continues to move and embrace the sophistication and complexity that is a modernized grid. But it's the key message here is really in that middle column, to take the leadership to know when and where you can suspend other things while making sure you can get your grid modernization framework in place, the rules, so that you don't kind of miss the opportunity to really take the coordination of those future applications into consideration before they show up. Finally, the other key piece here is one other lesson that really has to do with this notion of the rhythm that all this is set forth here, is that this is, to the management experts and what they call continuous improvement, that there is a need to embrace that continuous improvement here, that even when that grid modernization rule goes through this entire process and becomes the rule of the commission, to see it take effect, fully watch it with all of your jurisdictional utilities, and then on the backside of that, build the discipline of saying, what did we learn from that process, and how do we take a look at the rule itself and improve the rule and build upon the rule as a path forward in this process, realizing both it gives you a chance to improve the grid mod planning process we're talking about here, and then to embrace the new pieces that are coming at you as other parts of integrated distribution planning or vehicle electrification plans, as well as how this relates to integrated resource planning and the wider world of the transmission sector as well, and how all those pieces will steadily start to integrate more and more. It's a major challenge, but I think seeing it now and taking these steps toward it is really the heart of doing this work effectively. So with that, I'll pause there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Art. And
keep your screen up for a second. I'd like to go back to one of your slides while people are.
Sure.
Yeah. So please use the raise your hand function down in reactions, and we'll, I can't see everybody, but Colin will be here to help point out folks, and we'll take things in order. Can you go back to the slide, which I believe was the non-wires alternative, probably in the first third of the presentation?
I can.
That had a chart.
Right there, sir.
This one, yes, this one. I just wanted to point this out because to me, this was a new piece of information that I think is really very important to understand in how the utility services and costs associated with that are changing, in which we see combined expenditures for distribution, that component, right? Rising significantly over the past 15 years. And to me, that, regulatory function has traditionally been about getting the resources to meet load, right? And now we're talking about installing new infrastructure in order to accommodate differences in utility service. What does this chart mean to you, Jeff?
Yeah. Thanks, Art. Now, I'd love to hear the utilities weigh in on this as well. I think what it means is both just what you said, there has been a profound uptick in capital investment, for one thing, in the distribution grid. And whether that reflects kind of that was an area overdue because maybe there was more attention on generation and transmission, or I think it also reflects the pressure that has been growing steadily that end users, what we call consumers or customers or ratepayers, that the expectations are changing, possibly exponentially, if you could graph expectations of what they want from the grid. And it's not, universal, ubiquitous across all customers, but there's a clamoring from residential to commercial to industrial to want to have more options, to want a grid that is more dynamic to their benefit, as well as I think just the reality of the digital era, where utilities, I think, are leveraging the opportunity to move from sort of the mechanistic to the digital grid that you can operate much more dynamically, where you learn more up and down the system of the grid and you learn the benefits of sort of minute by minute, if not second by second grid management, which is, I think, as speaking as a non-technical person, is the future of how the grid operates.
Great, thank you. Matthew Barron from El Paso Electric had his hand raised, and then Commissioner Fishman.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your time and the work that you put into these presentations. I, as well as the rest of EP, and I'm sure my sister utilities are very appreciative of the fact that we were able to have the chance to provide input during those meetings. But to why I raised my hand is on this particular chart, what needs to be understood, and I believe the previous speaker, forgive me for not recognizing your name, got at to what was bothering, what kind of bothers me with this here, is that you have to understand what that is being comprised of and what is driving those numbers. Is it, and once you get an understanding of there, then you can start looking at the non-wires alternatives. Because if it's just a matter of population growth or changes, various non-technological reasons there, then that's going to happen whether or not you have a non-wires alternative. That is not to say that you should not explore those and determine if they can be helpful, but this in and of itself does not necessarily, should not necessarily lead one to the conclusion that, well, non-wires alternatives are your solution. Secondly, and this was hinted at by the previous speaker, is that you then have to, and this is gotten into by GridWorks in their report, we have to understand the cost recovery mechanism and how you're going to analyze those, the costs of those non-wires alternatives, which may be more expensive, but are we going to be able to factor into that system benefits? And at the end of the day, that is very, very important on how those analyses are done, because if it comes down to a cost recovery hearing and the non-wires alternative was approved, but then we are pilloried because, well, it was more expensive, then we're whipsawed. And really what we're looking for is a consistent direction that fits within the way that the regulatory framework has been set up. And that's all I had to say. Thank you very much for your time.
Hey, just a quick thanks, Matthew. It was always a pleasure to have EPE as well as the others utilities engaged throughout the webinar series. Jeff Ackerman here. Just say, I think you hit on a key part, and back to Art's question to me, a key part of this slide is really articulating an aspect of what I'm hearing you say, Matthew, is that we're getting to a place where there are more potential solutions to each distribution system situation or problem, if you embrace that question of problem, as the utility continues to manage the distribution grid and sees an anticipated need, whether it's due to growth or due to aging of equipment or due to whatever, and says, okay, historically the solution may have been just a new piece of equipment or a bigger piece of equipment, to now say there are several options inside of the realm of solutions to that, including things that are non-wired. And so that's what I think is really being embraced here, is to say that the spectrum has changed, and with that, the challenge of how you solve comparative analysis of things that are capital and things that are non-capital is an enormous challenge, and a challenge being put on you as the utility.
Commissioner Fishman, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So when I look at this slide, it reminds me of what I see as sort of a bigger long-term trend we all need to, I think, be aware of. And that is that as regulatory bodies, we've been set up and we've operated historically very much in the mode of regulating generation. Parties get submitted and we do very little review of many transmission projects and almost no review of distribution projects, certainly at the commission level. And as Jeff pointed out just a moment ago, there's a lot more options now in what you choose to do in terms of distribution and transmission, solving those issues and distributing electricity than there were before. And we see it reflected in FERC's proposed interconnection rules, where they're asking for comparisons. You see it a little bit in our new 440 rule, where we're asking, gee, did you look at alternatives? And the burden of regulation and the focus of it is, in my view, long-term, moving more and more to grid distribution and transmission and less to generation, simply because many jurisdictions have recognized that generation is not a natural monopoly, whereas the distribution and transmission still is. And I think we should all be very aware that long-term, the regulatory atmosphere, environment, is going to be this shift more and more to the grid itself and less to generation. And I don't think any of us have a choice in that. That's just the reality of reality. So anyway, I just wanted to make that comment.
I'm not sure it needs a response, but we'll certainly. I think that this is really kind of moving down that path. Commissioner Hull.
I wanted to just sort of chime in here too. One thing I've been real sensitive to as a commissioner, I've been aware of as one of our responsibilities is, making sure there is consistency to the extent, our rules can provide it. But I think what I'm about to say is something very similar to what Steve said, so I'll try to make it brief, which is that, we're just, because the development of new technology and the demands driven by climate change, we're finding ourselves in a point in time in a world where there are more choices for utilities to make in terms of how to meet load and how to meet the climate change driven requirements. And, they're in a different world than they were 15 years ago even. And it's not going to feel as consistent as it used to. And I'm sure Matthew knows that. But on the other hand, it seems to me, and I'm not saying this sarcastically at all. I think it's probably much more interesting to be a utility these days than in the past. I mean, yeah, it's challenging, but there are a range of options that have developed that just didn't exist 15 years ago. And I think that is the world that utility companies are stepping into, a world where they have choices to make that they didn't have, and they just have to be more nimble. In a way, they have to behave, even though they, at least parts of their business model will probably remain regulated in New Mexico anyhow for a while. They will be experiencing their business in many ways as a partly unregulated way. And I don't see how they can get around it from the way I see the delivery of electricity resources evolving with the supplement from distributed sources of energy and the option and the results of the effects of non-wire solutions. So I don't know. I just wanted to chime in. I think it's just our new reality. And, as commissioners, I think we need to try to make it as stable an experience as possible for utilities. But really, I don't think I don't think stability is going to be, or consistency in the way we've understood those terms before are going to be able to define the next 2 or 4 decades. So
Thank you, Chair Hurl.
Leave
I'm
it
always
there.
reminded of the ancient curse, may you live in interesting times.
right,
And this is exactly
Where
what
we
that
are.
is. And I'll just point out that it's not just the new variety of solutions to challenges, a new variety of challenges, a new variety of policy dictates, a new variety of players in the system, right?
Correct.
All of that fits together and is part and parcel of what we're trying to capture here and accommodate a lot of like new pressures that have never existed before. Matthew, I'm going to go back to you very quickly, please,
Yes.
because we have to move on.
No, and I just wanted to make sure that there's a point of clarification made. My opening statement was merely about, not relying solely on this as evidence. But secondly, I want to make it clear that myself, as well as others at EPE, and I'm sure within the other utilities, there's people like we're giddy as a schoolgirl about the opportunities presented by this new technology. We just want to ensure that it's done so in a manner that does not unduly punish us for leading the way, being innovative, because we are then held to the lowest cost standard. And with that, I will respectfully be quiet now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to move on and I'm going to take Jeff's sharing off the screen and share my slides, which are here, and hope that once again, put them into view mode. There we go. Everyone can see this, and you're going to hear some repetition in my presentation with many of the things that Jeff has said. I always end up using somewhat different language. So, but I think that we're very much on the same path, and I appreciate GridWorks helping to provide a framework, because I'm trying to put a little bit more meat on the bones of that framework, so to speak, in terms of talking about the considerations of, okay, we have goals and principles, how do we translate that into an actual rulemaking? And one of the things that I've learned in my 2 years here with the commission is that putting together a good, solid rule is a very difficult task. It really requires a lot of attention to detail, and I'm more of a big picture person, so kind of like finding that balance has always been an interesting challenge. Okay, so once again, I am Arthur O'Donnell, U.S. Department of Energy Solar Innovator. I support the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission, especially on grid modernization issues. That's kind of why I got into this and what my major framework was. The commission, along with the state and other agencies, are engaged in a multifaceted approach to promoting grid modernization. We have legislative direction, we have interagency efforts to define grid mod, and these have established policies to direct utility investments into programs and system upgrades that will accommodate a more diverse, interactive, lower carbon transportation, energy, and utility sectors. Increasing economic development opportunities and interregional energy markets are also part of this. And I think that you'll hear that later on from Representative Lujan, that these are going to be prime objectives for prospective legislation. In 2021-22, the PRC has introduced rulemakings that we've already referenced that are trying to build a foundation for grid modernization, because many of our rules had not been revisited in more than a decade, and some of them are brand new, like community solar, right? Advanced metering infrastructure was raised years ago and kind of set aside, and now it's back before the commission, right? A NOPR covering grid modernization is now, in my estimation, at the front of the line for consideration by the PRC, and maybe where we head next. Okay, so disclaimer. This presentation, opinions expressed do not represent any official policy statements of the PRC. There are pending cases related to advanced metering infrastructure in formal process, and any comments or descriptions of those issues in those cases should not be interpreted as an indication of how the commission may decide on the applications. I use AMI as an illustration in a couple of places here, but I really do not intend to weigh in on those proceedings. I'm not involved in those proceedings. Right, this is what we're going to cover today. A brief review of AB 233. Jeff has already done this, so I'll skip through that lightly. Some actual straw proposals, right? Procedural elements of a rulemaking. What should go into it, right? Applying HB 233 to utility applications. The issue of cost-benefit analysis was raised, and I'm going to kind of flesh out a little bit of where GridWorks landed on this, and some specific proposals for reliability reporting at the distribution level and grid modernization planning, which also could be distribution planning, right? So right now, we're going to focus on distribution largely because that's the main jurisdiction of the PRC. But we know that transmission is an important component of this, especially as New Mexico tries to take its rightful place as an importer and exporter of energy, of clean energy, wind and solar, to other parts of the U.S. West, right? So that's all part of it, but our main focus is distribution. Okay. So as you know, this act was passed in 2020, and there are a couple of different parts of it, but for our purposes, the important thing was that it provided utilities specific authority to ask for money, right, for grid modernization, right? And it also includes a provision that not only the utility applications should be acted upon, but upon request of the commission, right? That the commission might identify needs. Now, we haven't gotten to that place yet, but I have a feeling that we're going to get there pretty quickly in the next couple of years. So we really want to, provide the good basic framework for that. It says in the act that a utility that undertakes grid modernization projects approved pursuant to this section may recover reasonable costs through an approved tariff rider or in base rates or by a combination. Costs that are consistent with commission-approved utility grid modernization projects are presumed to be reasonable. So it's not a carte blanche, right? But what is consistent, right, with commission-approved projects and that's where we get into the planning function, as we'll kind of end up. Because how do you measure consistency unless you have a benchmark, right, to measure it against? I'm not going to go into all of these. Jeff has already highlighted some of them. These are the things that the Act says the Commission should consider. Now, these are not requirements, they're not conditions, and in fact, some of them are mutually exclusive. For instance, facilities to promote regional markets are not going to be the same kinds of projects that as projects that are meant to increase access to renewable energy for underserved communities, right? They're two different critters. There's also some specific functions in terms of reduced air pollution and the expectation of essentially economic development, right? You have private capital investments, skilled jobs, related services, and providing much more of a sense that this is something that requires consumer education and information. And all of those things should be considerations in whatever kinds of projects the Commission would consider. Okay. There was a slight revision to 233 the next year. And really, I looked it up. I thought, oh, I don't even remember this, but mostly it was clarifying that grid modernization projects may include distribution system hardening and substation projects that are intended to reduce outages and improve efficiency and security. We would call that reliability, right? Really, it also kind of points to this need for New Mexico to improve its access to regional markets. So while it talks about distribution system hardening, I would presume that there's also an intent here for transmission, right? there are numerous kinds of investments that have been identified, and I won't go through them here, but these slides will be available through our docket, and I think that you've seen these before because we've talked about this before. What it is very different than distributed energy resources of the solar and solar PV and energy storage and wind that we've spent so much time focusing on. But what are the facilities and what are the new technologies that help enable those things, including intelligent grid devices, so that you have real-time visibility into how assets are performing, automation, communications. Physical security is a really important aspect. Cybersecurity is a really important aspect. And anything that really helps enable demand response and electric vehicle charging and electrification of buildings and new customer information platforms. All of that has been contemplated by the legislature and gives us a menu of options, right, to pursue in the future. And the challenge is, all right, how do we make sense of that, right? There's so many things that you could do and only limited resources to do it. So what the commission is really interested in is finding a way to balance these things into a cohesive system, okay? So that is what goes into a grid mod rulemaking. And I'll say that this is purely my way of thinking about this. It does resonate a lot with what GridWorks has provided, but we have to reconcile all the potential project possibilities with priorities, right? The state has to be in a position of deciding what to do first. And the commission has really taken up that challenge in the wake of 233. We'll talk a little bit about that. We need to delineate what are maintenance upgrades from new initiatives. And the commission took a step down that path and realized that they are really two different critters, so you shouldn't conflate them. We need to refine the process for how utilities bring applications, or the PRC requesting them, or, as we'll discuss, third parties to possibly bring applications for cost sharing of upgrades that are necessary to accommodate new interconnections. We have to determine what the qualitative criteria for evaluating projects might be. That's more difficult, right? We have what the considerations are, but really, how do you actually kind of like measure those things? And I'll posit that one is to promote a holistic approach rather than having one-off projects. If things tie together, right, then it's more likely to fit a number of needs that the commission wants to address. How do you maximize the benefits from programs for ratepayers and communities? And that gets into cost benefit analysis. And then a fair cost allocation. And how do you mediate the rate impacts? Make no mistake, this is going to cost money. Money is a lot more expensive than it used to be. So the commission's job becomes not just making sure that the utilities have the resources to provide safe, reasonable, cost-effective energy, but also how to allocate that fairly to the users, right? And that's going to be a big challenge. I don't have an answer to that. I'm just saying that these are things that the commission is really going to have to take into account as it promotes a rulemaking for this. And then finally, as Jeff said, you really need a way to measure and evaluate the effectiveness. And that can be done through metrics. It also can be done from revisiting issues with the experience gained by promoting certain projects and seeing how they work. Okay, just going to a couple of those bullet points, right? And I'll point out that this prioritization already took place at the commission after the passage of 233 and the effort by the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Division to create a roadmap for grid modernization. As many of you were involved in that process, you recall that a technical advisory group with a lot of volunteer participants helped widow through the ideas and identified 11 action items. And most of those action items required input and specific rulemaking activity from the PRC because purse strings, right? The commission did identify its priorities in early 2021 as interconnection, integrated resource planning, and then the Community Solar Act passed, and now we're making an attempt towards grid modernization proposals. Okay, in 2022, the commission took another step by directing Southwest Public Service Company of New Mexico to file applications for advanced metering infrastructure, specifically within the framework of the Grid Modernization Act, right? In its order on directing PNM in particular, there was this, to me, a remarkable policy statement, right, for the beginning of a proceeding, which is that the commission finds that implementation of AMI comports with the Grid Modernization Statute, will benefit PNM, New Mexico retail customers and the public, and will provide net public benefits. Now, that's kind of going out on a limb without having a whole lot of process behind it, but what it does is it sets up a way to put some of the most important benefits of AMI into a construct. This was also in that order, which identified the good things that can come out of AMI. I'm not going to read through them, but you'll see a strong correlation with the considerations that were in 233. But it goes beyond just providing new meters with real-time data so that you replace meter readers, right? It really goes to providing for accommodating increased levels of distribution resources, increasing the capability to supply regional needs, supporting flexible distribution energy portfolios, and improving customer education. So that's kind of like how the commission translated those conditions. And by finding a net benefit, that will kind of really impact the evaluation tools that we have, as we'll get to in a couple of slides. Right. Further, PNM said, this is a big task. Can we have a little bit more time? Right. And so in May, the commission did grant an extension and further, right, put some kind of considerations of around the AMI in particular. And it really drew on what PNM had said as values that it saw, which included remote fault detection, updated rate designs, including time of use, right, which would be much more accurate if you have real-time metering, and demand response and grid management programs, right? Now, while not addressing all of the benefits that the commission identified, these elements provide a more holistic perspective on what an AMI installation is able to accomplish. So I'm not, promoting PNM's specific AMI application, which was something like 400 pages long, and a lot of money over a significant time period as a foundational approach to grid modernization. But what it did was it took that first step in terms of broadening what this project looks like and what it can do for New Mexico consumers. Okay. The second item here also kind of relates to work that the commission has done in delineating maintenance upgrades. Right, Commissioner Fishman identified Rule 440, which is extensions and additions to distribution lines, cooperative agreements among utilities, and Rule 592, which is construction of large capacity plant. And it's not just utility. I mean, this is any kind of chemical plant or a manufacturing plant that might come before the commission in terms of its impact on customers. All right. The commission in July of last year issued a docket 21-00171 to explore how those existing rules should be updated and what the relationship is with grid modernization. Honestly, when comments came in, there was a strong feeling that these are two different things, right? That there is kind of a wall between them. I'm not quite sure it's a wall so much as a line on the ground that says this is this and that is that, right? And you could go back to the comments that really found not a whole lot of support among parties for combining the rule updates, which are important and which are ongoing, with a grid modernization rulemaking. So the commission did determined that these are two separate issues. They didn't want to intermix those and would proceed with 440-592 because that was a pressing need, and put grid modernization into the construct that we talked about today, which was we needed a lot more information, and then GridWorks came in and provided a bunch of information. Another element is refining the process for how IOUs bring applications. Well, that's pretty simple. The IOU brings an application, and the commission considers it. But what are the terms? What makes a necessity for the commission to identify projects that it thinks the utilities should pursue? That really is a core function of this new act, and it needs to be addressed in the rulemaking. I don't have an answer to that, but I will say that in the interconnection rule and in the Community Solar Act, the commission has inserted provisions for cost sharing of some potential distribution facility upgrades if the commission finds there to be a system benefit aligned with terms of the grid modernization criteria. Neither rule went further than really kind of like identifying that cost sharing should be an option for the future in certain circumstances and deferring it into a future grid modernization act, right? More recently, though, as we were taking comments on the interconnection rule, PNM in particular suggested a process for the commission to entertain cost sharing proposals from project developers. And, you know, what we were envisioning was a kind of low hanging fruit, which is if you got more than one developer that wants to use the same interconnection facilities, why not let them share the costs of the study for what's required to upgrade those? And potentially, is there a way to evaluate a benefit from upgrading those facilities that goes beyond just serving that developer's needs or that customer's needs into a system benefit? Now, while new to New Mexico, this is not a new concept. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission does this at the transmission level. There are system benefit analysis, right, that would then go, some portion of the cost of an upgrade project would go into the transmission rate component that FERC approves and then the commission allocates, right, because we don't have jurisdiction over that. And this is what PNM proposed, which is a developer could file an application, that the application is assigned to a hearing examiner, that utility division staff would file a recommendation within 30 days. If the hearing examiner determines that no hearing is needed, the commission would take public comment and dispose of the application at a public hearing. And then the commission would issue an order granting or denying the application with 120 days of filing. This is very similar to existing process, right? It's maybe a little bit more formalistic than the approval of an advice notice or a tariff, but it does raise the question, is this a process that might apply to grid modernization projects, right? And we'll come back to that in discussion because I don't want to take up, you know, too much time right now. I'm already talking too much on this, but we will move on to really, we've already talked about that cost benefit analysis. And this was something that Jeff raised. And again, I used the AMI investments to at least identify one of the big problems with monetizing the benefits of new technologies and new approaches, right? Traditional least cost requirements just don't fit here, right? Because it does require new investment, right? And least cost means not doing anything. And we're in an era where if you don't do anything, your system's just going to be not capable of answering the challenges that are being imposed upon it. Traditional regulatory cost benefit analysis, which really derived from the energy efficiency, right, programs, which is this amount of money that we're investing in energy efficiency better than, right? Does it have more benefit than the alternative, which at that time was new generation to meet load, right? You have several tests, utility cost test, total resource test, or social cost test. They just don't prove effective for these types of investments. And this is why. This is the conundrum that we see. And I'm using AMI here again, not specific to the applications that are before the commission, but because in particular, AMI can be expensive or it can be very expensive, right? And one of the reasons is that meters themselves are cheap, $250 a meter. You times that by your 500,000 customers if you're PNM, and you got a dollar figure. But it's the network that goes into those connecting those meters to the utility such that you can get that data on a real-time basis so that you can get more visibility into energy use patterns. You can find out where the faults are, and this is part and parcel of the applications that we're seeing from the utilities. So it's really difficult to kind of like, that's a lot more money, and then it becomes difficult to project the values because a lot of these benefits don't translate well into dollars, right? They translate into improved reliability, better operations, a more flexible system. How do you put a dollar figure on that, right? And that's really the crux of the problem. And also, technology doesn't stand still. I was in California when our utilities were putting in smart meters, and now we're finding that the way that the network was conceptualized doesn't necessarily fit the new technology, right? Telecommunications networks have upgraded to 5G, and we were building around a 3G system because that was futuristic at the time. You have to take that into consideration, and you have to build in a sense that there may be further investments necessary in the future. Okay, so other jurisdictions, in fact, half of America has already put in smart meters, and the other half is grappling with doing this. Other states are trying to come up with a good analysis. One of the places where we looked for guidance is Hawaii, where there is deep penetration of solar photovoltaics on people's homes because the reliability on the islands was so terrible. I mean, it was really, really bad. And so people were taking it in their hands, and this raised a whole bunch of problems in and of itself. So when the Hawaiian Electric Company was looking at its grid modernization strategy, it came up with a construct that I think is useful, which is, what's the purpose of this investment, right? Are you meeting standards and safety? Are you complying with a policy, right? Like the Energy Transition Act, for instance. Are you looking at a net benefit analysis where some customers will benefit, but others might not, right? How do you deal with that? And then what we call self-supporting projects, where this is the traditional causer of the cost pays the full bill, okay? And so you've got 4 different ways to look at it. And what they came up with the sense that if you're trying to meet new standards, right? IEEE 1547, 2018, requirements from policy like the Energy Transition Act or grid modernization planning, or this need to diversify your system, that the methodology that makes the most sense is a lowest reasonable cost standard, also known as least cost best fit, right? Because what you're looking at is, does this investment really answer the problem that we're trying to solve? And is it the cheapest way of doing that, right? So that's very different than least cost, right? It kind of expands the realm of possibilities there. If you're looking at net benefits, then you really have to measure what your understanding of the cost is versus the benefits. Some of those things are monetized, some of them can't be monetized, but for that purpose, the total resource cost test really is best. And some people would say that you should add a social cost of carbon into the total resource cost, right? It fits within that component. Washington State just passed a kind of imputed cost of carbon of $41, which changes how you're looking at measuring one alternative versus another, right? If it doesn't have carbon emissions, right? Mostly it was about generation, but that certainly flows through to a lot of different kinds of investments. And then finally, the self-supporting projects, as I indicated, even the nature of that is New York, Massachusetts, even now the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission are looking at a cost sharing model such that one developer doesn't bear the entire burden of upgrading a system, especially if it becomes the case that other people are going to benefit from that, from tailing on to that project, right? So those are possibilities, and where Hawaii landed, and where I think that we should be looking at, is that a lowest reasonable cost determination is the most practical approach to evaluating investments to build a core modern distribution grid, right? So that's the question, is that, how does that fit into a grid modernization rulemaking? Should the commission specify that as the measure, or should the commission set out that if you have these 4 different ways of reasons to invest, that different approaches are appropriate for them, right? And then leave it on a case-by-case basis. That's a question that the commission is going to have to answer. Okay, I'm going to move into an area now which is somewhat new, which was not addressed by the GridWorks presentations, but it is common around the country, and this is reliability reporting. And I'll posit that a foundation of sound investments, especially at the distribution level, is accurate reporting and assessment of the performance of the grid. Okay. Now, the industry has standardized metrics. You know them, right? SAIDI, minutes of sustained outages per customer per year. CAIDI, which is the average time required to restore service over a predefined period of time. SAIFI, which is the number of sustained outages per customer per year, number as opposed to duration. And MAFI, which is the number of momentary outages, right? So all of those are used on a regular basis, although, as you'll hear later on, not all utilities use these metrics, right? In New Mexico, our co-ops do not report their reliability this way, although our investor-owned utilities do. Okay, so when you're looking at a proposed reliability reporting, this would be language that could go into a rule, which is beginning at date certain, and every 2 years thereafter, each utility provides a report on the reliability of its distribution system, in particular at the circuit level, right? That information should be available publicly on the website of the utility and or the website of the department or the commission in a conspicuous place. Each biennial report should also identify the top 10% of the worst performing circuits in each utility territory, using those numbers, right? The metrics that we talked about, the numbers of customers that are served by each circuit, and provide an analysis of the reasons for these outages, what incidents cause this. And they could include weather events that you have no control over. They could be aging infrastructure. They could be constraints on circuit capacity due to customer load or other factors, or they could be increased penetration of DER or electric vehicle charging that is contributing to a lower reliability. And importantly, what these reports should do is provide a plan for investing to improve the conditions on those circuits, right? Where you take all those things into consideration, right? Just like any other investment, the utility would recapture that cost through rate cases, but still bears the burden of proof, okay? Each subsequent report, right, after that first 2 years, would also include a description of actions, investments, operational changes that the utility has undertaken to improve the reliability of those target circuits and provide analysis of such improvements using those statistical measures, okay? It's my feeling, and this is, something that we work with the utilities in California. They provide this on an every year basis. And they have a lot of visibility into circuits. In fact, Southern California Edison created interactive maps where you can go into and see each circuit in each of its operating regions and get the safety numbers for those circuits and then rank them, right? So that, for instance, when the city of Irvine, which is a very affluent community, had a spate of 2 or 3 events that caused outages in their downtown area, we could go and look at exactly what was going on those circuits and how those circuits compared to the worst performing circuits. And what it turned out was that they actually were doing pretty good. It's just that they had a run of 3 bad incidents, right? And one of them was a fatality where a line worker got electrocuted, and it caused a downtown outage. But it helped alleviate the political pressure that we're hearing. You're not doing enough to keep our reliability high, and we vote, kind of thing. So anyway, while it does provide more information that can be used as ammunition against you, it also provides the information that can be used to your benefit. So that's what I'm thinking about that. We can have some discussion about that. Getting back to the things that GridWorks has talked about, grid modernization planning. And, here, around the country, the trend.
Do you want to pause? Chairman Hall has a question for you.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. Commissioner Hall.
Thanks, Art. I was trying to type it in, but I'm a very slow typer.
Yeah, I wasn't looking.
That's really amazing to hear about interactive distribution grid maps in California. How long did it take for that to come into being, and did they have to pass a law to make that happen? California PSC just passed a rule?
No, this was a utility initiative that emanated from this reliability reporting. The reliability reporting was part of a commission order to the utilities, and it's been in effect for a long time. But Edison, kind of went a lot further. What we found is that it was expensive, and that it required almost a constant updating of the information, right? So then the commission had to determine, well, how often do we want this? Do we want this, updated every month? Do we want this updated every 6 months, right? Because there's a big cost component there. But it really was a utility initiative.
So did it continue, or was it determined it was too expensive to maintain?
No, it's still there. No, it's still there. And they put out a print report.
Oh, so okay. So the utility. So did just that one utility do it, Con Edison, or
Southern California Edison?
SoCal Ed. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. PG&E had all other problems. Yeah, PG&E had other problems. Right. Okay.
I see.
Okay.
So it showed. And let me just finish the question. So it showed in real time what was it showing exactly?
The showing for the reporting
operation
period, what the reliability metrics were for individual circuits, and Edison has like 7,000 circuits. So you could really get down to a local community, like a place like Irvine might have 5 or 6 major circuits serving it, right, in different geographic parts of town. So it was really an incredible tool for visibility into the system. But it wasn't on a real-time basis. No, you actually required collecting this data, right, based on operations, and then inputting it into this model.
It's interesting. I can imagine all kinds of consequences, like people moving possibly to some different distribution system or something. But in any case, were you aware that of how the public felt about that? Did they feel there was a value there?
I think that the education on the availability of this tool was a little bit lacking, and the commission did recommend to Edison that they do a little bit more to promote it. Right, and I remember that
they recommended what?
Do more to promote it.
I see.
Right? The initial usage figures were not incredibly high, but I can't give you current. It's been years. Okay,
Commissioner Thank you very much.
Sure.
Just a quick question. Were there any issues surrounding national security that were raised as part of that program and the visibility of the grid to terrorists?
That was another issue that we took up in the physical security of the distribution network. And I'll just say that the national Homeland Security position is that the transmission grid is a lot more vulnerable and a lot more impactful than the distribution grid, right? So there was a lesser concern about making this information available, right? I'll just tell you that, we did go through a process where we grappled with those issues after the Metcalf incident, and this was a Pacific Gas and Electric substation that was both a distribution substation and a transmission substation because it was a hub, down in San Jose, and somebody came in one night and shot up transformers, right? 100 bullets. Didn't impact power delivery. Did apparently they chopped up some fiber optic cables that impacted the communication of that station with the greater utility operational center, and that led to a whole, I mean, really a big existential crisis where FERC got involved and FBI got involved and Homeland Security got involved, and you know, kind of like what's our commission going to do? Our commission deals with distribution, so we at least came up with a way for the utilities to do some upgrade planning for the distribution facilities and not make it completely public, right? Because you don't want to talk about how you're putting in surveillance cameras and bullet detectors and all that stuff, because people will thwart that. But the commission got access to those plans as they were being developed. I'm not going down that path here, right? You know, but you know, again, it costs money, and you have to decide as a policymaker whether that money is where you want to spend the money. Okay, I'm sorry. If I can go on so that we have some time for discussion on this, just what should be in grid modernization? Okay, here again, proposed language. Nobody's tied to this, but this is just my way of looking at it. Is that really on a 3-year basis, comporting with the IRP, that there would be a plan with a detailed assessment, proposed expenditures for capital and O&M within the time frame of your next rate case, right? You're spending now, although there's long-term impacts, justification for such expenditures to meet the goals and findings of the statewide grid modernization program, I guess, plan here. This was originally written when we were thinking about possibly not just a roadmap, but a plan. And the commission would approve proposed spending if it concludes that ratepayers would realize net benefits. And we already talked about net benefits in the context of AMI, but also how do we measure net benefits compared to the costs? And that, again, just and reasonable. It's not really that much different from looking at planning, but again, the difference is that this isn't just about generation resources or even demand side programs or distributed energy resources. This is about the network that delivers those services, okay? Just going back to kind of the types of things that might come in here, you know, the state identified in 233, 12 things. I kind of bundle them together into these platforms of services, if you could, which is advanced grid capabilities, which is visibility into the system. We have a whole new generation of technologies for metering, sensor, intelligent switching, right, to improve reliability. We have the communication networks that we already talked about to enable real-time data transfers, going to be much more important as markets develop. Information technology for improved forecasting, right, and planning, right? All that can come from these technologies, and then increasing grid capacity for DER, right, which is actually kind of a fundamental thing that we're grappling with now as utilities are taking in applications for distributed energy resources. So that's the outline of what a plan should look like, you know, kind of with more of the stuff that Jeff and GridWorks talked about in terms of identifying principles and goals. I have these 3 goals, which are a little bit different, which is to modernize the distribution system to accommodate two-way flows of energy throughout the networks, to enable customer choice of new technologies and services that reduce emissions, and to encourage opportunities for DER to provide grid services so that you've got a more interactive two-way flow that's providing benefits to the utilities as well as to customers, right? And that's how I envision all of that stuff putting together. So the question for discussion is, how should the PRC proceed with these proposals, right? What should we do about a rulemaking that tries to incorporate these things? Are some of the things that I talked about really outside the realm, right? Or 5 years away from now, right? All I'll say about that is future comes a lot faster than you think, right? So with that, I'd like to at least open it up to a discussion from folks. Colin's going to help me identify who is seeking to have input, and I'll try and answer any questions. I can leave the slides up or I can exit the slides right now. And the view of the gallery is, please, we opened up this Zoom so that we could have some kind of communication. We have, more than 10 minutes, 15 minutes to talk about this before we move on to the next portion of the agenda. So I'm really interested in hearing what you have to think. Some of this by now should be familiar because many of these ideas have been discussed in the past. Many of them have been taken up in the various proceedings that the commission has pursued. You're probably facing these same challenges in your operations. What do you think? Hands raised, anybody? I either talk too fast or everybody's asleep, one of the two.
Well, Art,
Yes,
Art,
sure.
I would like to know particularly how the utilities are reacting to what actually is like an invitation to kind of tell us how they'd like to proceed, because I do really like that about the grid mod statute right now, is to have the utilities, or even let us ask the utilities to submit an application. But I think there's a lot in the utilities court in a way that they can define for themselves. And I wonder how that feels from the utility perspective. How is that being how are you guys reacting to that? I mean, we've seen a couple of things come in the door at the commission recently that look like, and they're not necessarily grid mod filings, but one is, and another one is maybe an IRP filing, but it looks like utilities are, very much looking toward the future and wanting to integrate new technologies. But I would like to hear from whoever's out there that would like to say anything on this.
Okay. Yeah.
Does this look exciting or just burdensome?
Yeah, Darren Zigich had his hand raised, and then we will go and try and twist the arms of the utilities. And this is something that GridWorks was really good at through all its webinars, was actually kind of like pointing to people, right, and saying, "What do you think, Darren?"
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not the utilities, but just from my experience in the utility industry and the power plant design and stuff in the old days, it'd be nice if the commission or somebody came up with a design criteria. It's an engineering term that we use in the power plant industry, of course, a design criteria, or at least some sort of a vision of what they want a modern grid to look like. Because without that, you can really go down a rabbit hole of high costs without knowing your end game. I mean, you can design, you have no vision, you have no end game, what you're trying to build out to. So without that can be a very costly learning process without some sort of an end game vision as to what the modern grid is supposed to look like. So okay.
I will suggest that the Electric Power Research Institute for the last 15 years has promoted the concept of essentially the smart grid. And that's really one of the stepping points along this. Things have developed since then, especially with the kind of real penetration of DER and the introduction of energy storage that wasn't contemplated originally. And that's kind of a vision, right? And we're still working towards that vision. But I agree with you, is that that's part of what the commission needs to do. But we're not the technology people to define that. And that work is being done at the national labs, right? NREL is a really good place for that. Lawrence Berkeley Lab, Lawrence Livermore Lab, the PNNW, all of those places have little parts of that. It's bringing it together. I'm going to let Commissioner Fishman ask his question, and then I'm going to identify a utility person to give us a response.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So a specific question for the utilities. It seems to me a lot of what slows us down is inability to create truly safe spaces for innovation, and not just for the utilities, protecting them from losses when we try something new, but also customers, because customers sit at the end of this, and oftentimes they face charges and costs. And it seems to me we need to be creative in developing safe spaces for innovation for the utilities and for their customers. And so I'd very much like the utilities, when you ask them about this, do they have any creative ideas around that? What would their suggestions be? But I think it's incumbent on all of us to develop those safe spaces.
Okay, I am going to introduce everybody to Brooke Trammell, who has recently come into this market for Excel as a vice president overseeing regulatory and legal affairs. Brooke, I first met at the NARUC conference in San Diego, in which she was on a panel which was talking about a lot of these same issues, right? What is the nature of reliability, and what are utilities doing it? Brooke, I'm going to put it to you. What do you think about all this stuff, and how would you answer Commissioner Fishman and Commissioner Hall's questions?
Thank you, Art. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon, commissioners. I am Brooke Trammell. I'm the Regional Vice President for SBS. I appreciate the questions and the open discussion here, and the opportunity to share some information with the Commission about what we're looking at and some specific things, as we've noted on the agenda, that we'll get to later, kind of what we're doing in these spaces. But I don't have a perfect answer to Commissioner Fishman's question about how do we create a safe space, but I think a conversation about the plans and the utilities' vision and thoughts about where grid modernization needs to occur is absolutely relevant and necessary. We've talked a lot today in the workshop, and a lot of the information that we've gone over has been really informative to me. But we think about the energy policy goals in New Mexico and across many of the jurisdictions that Xcel Energy serves, and the jurisdictions and regulatory environments in the US. And there's been a lot of focus on clean energy policy, right? Xcel Energy was the first company, first utility in the United States to announce and commit to a carbon-free goal. In 2018, we announced we wanted to be 80% carbon-free by 2030, with an aspirational goal of 100% carbon-free by 2050. In SBS's system, we are currently 40% carbon-free. We've reduced our carbon emissions 40% from 2005 levels, and we expect to meet that 80% goal by 2030. On the generation side, we're ahead of the ETA requirements currently. Of course, there's a long way to go as those milestones are in front of us, and I know the Commission's very focused on those as well. But today we, with renewable energy, deliver about 40% of our New Mexico retail sales, again, from delivered renewable energy on our system. But as we are committed to a reliable and affordable transition of our generation fleet and our generation technology to clean energy, we know that the grid needs to transition as well to support that clean energy future. So when we have clean energy resources that are increasingly intermittent with different generation technologies, we do need a different grid to support those kinds of operations. Additionally, we have customer interest in electrification. We support electrification. We support all of the ways our customers use energy, whether it's electricity, natural gas in the states where we serve or supply natural gas service in our LDC operations, and of course, transportation electrification. But tomorrow's grid looks different. And in order to support that clean energy future, the transmission grid and the distribution grid will need to be enhanced and essentially operate at ways that it different than it does today. So we think in New Mexico that the grid modernization statute supports this transition to a different grid. I think personally of the New Mexico grid modernization statute as a bridge to that future grid, so analyzing where we are today on the electric grid and what do we need to do to get to that future grid, to get to a grid that will support that kind of generation technology, different end uses from customers, different levels of distributed energy on the distribution grid, those kinds of things. So yes, we have a grid modernization application before the commission. We don't need to talk about that today. I think the commission is familiar with our first steps with our Aegis initiative, but those efforts are really geared towards increasing our visibility onto the distribution grid and enhancing the operability of the grid. And that's going to be a foundational framework to support additional enhancements or additional capabilities of the distribution grid. But again, as we think about that energy transition and where the accelerated pace of intermittent generation and more distributed generation will occur, we will continue to be focusing on transitioning the distribution and transmission grid and ensuring the reliability of it. So there's a place for innovative technologies there. There's a place for different use of technologies, potentially at different places on the system. And there's definitely a need for the two-way communication and the two-way insight into the grid as we see today, as we continue to have more energy coming onto the grid from the customer side. So I don't know if that answers your question completely, Art, but we look forward to working with the commission as they navigate a grid modernization rulemaking. We look forward to having a framework to file grid modernization plans with the commission. And of course, working with the commission as they review our first grid modernization application.
Good. Brooke, thank you very much. You did begin to address a question that came up in the chat, which is how does all this fit in with the need to better integrate regional markets? And I'll just say that, again, the commission doesn't have a jurisdiction over transmission per se, but a lot of these same technologies help to provide increased reliability, increased visibility at the transmission level and at the distribution level, right? They're at two different, portions of the system, but a lot of the same new technologies are really important to that. And certainly the statute contemplates approval of those kind of infrastructure investments to the extent that they really are in the commission's jurisdiction. And a lot of times that means upgrading the substation to accommodate the increase in capacity on transmission lines, right? That's the portion that the commission has jurisdiction over. I think those lines are changing. FERC has certainly dipped down into the distribution system with regard to the demand response and participation of distribution resources in wholesale markets, interstate markets. But we're in a changing system. Unfortunately, I have overstepped my time for this presentation, and I don't want to disadvantage the people who are coming. So if it's okay, we're just going to treat this as the beginning of a conversation that the commission will have. Mike D'Antonio, did you have something quick?
Yeah, just quickly to Commissioner Fishman's question on safe spaces. The first part of the Grid Modernization Act has a grant program established, and we've talked in the past about actually utilizing that with public partnerships, either schools, et cetera, to actually demonstrate innovative technologies. So if they're actually paid for by a grant program, it would reduce the risk that would be inherent for the utilities to take on some new kinds of innovation and new technologies, which might be an avenue to answer Fishman's question on that.
And what a good segue to our next segment, which is how do we get money to do this? And so we're going to move on that and talk about federal support and funding opportunities. As I indicated earlier, we've asked Jackie Waite from MNRD to talk about the proposal that the agency has put in. We've asked specifically PNM and Excel to talk about what they're seeing as opportunities. And I'll just if I can, I'm going to share my screen one more time and just kind of like identify that there's a lot of money out there. And there are two particular bills. One is the bipartisan infrastructure law. Right? It's also called the Infrastructure and Investment and Justice Act, IIJA, that has, in the latest tranche that the Department of Energy is looking at, it's like $10.5 billion for grid resilience and innovation, right? That's split into three different components: grid resilience grants, smart grid grants, grid innovation program. And some of this is available to utilities, some of this is available to communities. Little of it is available to public utility commissions. Only the last grid innovation program might have money that this commission could partner and seek. But I learned something new today, which is from an article from Canary Media, which is that the law also included what's called Section 1706, which is up to $250 billion with a B dollars in low interest loans that could be used to renovate or retire existing infrastructure. You know that as legacy coal plants, petrochemical plants, right? Upgrading transmission lines to accommodate change generation facilities at those sites. That's a lot of money, right? And it was little known, and we appreciate Canary Media and Jeff St. John, who's a great energy reporter, calling that attention. And I think that if you have access to Canary, you should be following those stories. Secondarily, the Inflation Reduction Act largely is about tax credits, but also includes transmission facility financing, right? Siting of interstate electricity transmission, right? In the hundreds of millions of dollars, which doesn't go that far, but it does cross state lines, and offshore wind electricity transmission planning. So very specific, but there are a lot of other opportunities, and you're going to hear about what our utilities are thinking about. But first, I'd like to ask Jackie Waite, if you're here, and if not, I think it lands on Darren.
I'm here.
Oh, there
I'm
you
here.
are. Yeah. And do you have slides, or are you just going to talk at us?
I do have slides.
Okay. You
I'm gonna
will
share
have
those.
the ability to share the screen.
Okay, tell me when you can see it.
Yes, right there.
Okay, great. So thank you, everyone. Thanks to PRC for having us today from MNRD. I also wanted to give a shout out to GridWorks and to PRC, especially Arthur, for building on what the Grid Modernization Advisory Group had done a couple of years ago, and moving things forward, and for keeping us all at the table. I think that's really important. So what I'd like to do, as Arthur mentioned, and also picking up on what Mike D'Antonio just said, I want to talk about our 40101D, our State Energy Office application to DOE under the IIJA Section 40101D funding opportunity. And then if you'll permit me, I'd also like to, I have one slide at the end giving some updates about our existing state grid modernization program. So some of you have heard me talk about this before. We did a public meeting in August about this opportunity. And so I'm going to give kind of a modified, abridged version of that. But I would just want to remind everyone and let you know for the first time, if this is the first time you're hearing about it, that this opportunity is pretty narrowly focused on resilience. The whole framing for this opportunity is resilience, and particularly preventing and recovering from outages as a result of extreme weather events and climate events. And so I just wanted to put that out there. We do think, of course, that there's an opportunity Because we're doing all of this in the context of an energy transition, there is an opportunity to talk and use funds for grid modernization activities, and I'll get to that. I just also want to remind folks that we, the state, are on the hook for a 15% match. And our sub-awardees are also on the hook for funding matches for projects. And then we are expected to get 36 million, give or take, a little bit more than that over the next 5 years, provided that the current funding formula stays in place. And then this is a formula grant, just stress that. That means we are pretty much guaranteed to get the money as long as we fulfill all the obligations of the application. So we had to, as part of our application, we had to establish 3 to 5 primary objectives of the program. I'm going to talk about the first 2. So the first one, to meet the requirements is, of course, we want to increase resilience and reduce outages in the context of hazards and threats. We want to know particularly what we can glean from past events and potentially what we can predict from the future. And really, we're talking about kind of the nuts and bolts of grid hardening, and I'll talk about those in a second. Then, as I mentioned, because we as a state are undergoing, everything in the context of a transition, this is where we think there could be a connection to grid modernization. So what are the tools and technologies we need to improve resilience? Again, that's the framing. As we add more variable resources, and how do we know? And we're thinking about that both at the distribution level and the bulk power level. So just to give you a sense, to hammer this home, this is the list, and I hope you can see pretty well. This is the list of things that DOE says we can spend money on. And they're very specific to, again, preventing and recovering from outages. So undergrounding, vegetation management, doing things with pole integrity, et cetera. And so what I did to justify all of those things on that DOE list is to backward map it to common events from the state. And I used DOE's own energy security risk profile, which covered, the one that was available covers 2009 to 2019, which of course doesn't cover our latest fires and flooding and things, but the hazards themselves haven't changed. So just wanted to mention that. And then, similarly, I mapped another set of things that DOE is telling us we can spend money on to some of the things that I think can help us with energy transition, and particular things that we would consider probably more in the realm of grid modernization. So, these are some projects we've been noodling on these for the last few months. This is by no means an exhaustive list, and I'm looking forward to hearing what the utilities are thinking about proposing. But potentially, an opportunity to be able to support some of the utility initiatives to understand edge of grid, things that are happening, particularly in light of the fact that, the IRA, which is going to give the states and all of us more incentive to adopt electric vehicles, to potentially electrify our heating. And of course, we know that we are experiencing greater penetration of behind the meter PV on the system. So this is where I see, the opportunity to be able to support pilot projects, to be able to support research, to be able to support those risks that utilities are talking about taking in order to understand some of the benefits.
Thank you.
And I
have
do
two
want to
quick
say too that
questions.
these,
Yeah.
I've grouped these things, but they're fluid, right? If we reconductor a power line with different materials or make the thermal limit higher, right, then we can add more renewables to the grid. At the same time, we could use modeling to understand potential climate impacts on the grid. So they shouldn't be considered set in stone.
Two quick questions.
Yeah.
You had talked about what was the request? Was it $7 million for the first year? And then it could be over 5 years? Is that how it worked out?
It's 7 and change over 5 years. Yeah.
Over 5 years, okay.
Yeah.
Because we had this conversation, is it per year or is it over 5 years?
That's right.
And secondarily, when we were talking about your development before the application went in, you were looking at trying to focus this money on the needs of rural co-ops. Is that still your kind of target audience?
It absolutely is. And we expect, if we go back to this list, we expect that a lot of the need for these things are going to be at the co-op level. So, you know, we'll wait and see what applications we get and to see if indeed that is a need. And if the co-ops would like to express that at any point, that would be good. But we anticipate that given what we know about past events, disaster events, given what we know about energy burden and other issues with the co-ops, we expect that a lot of the resources will go to them. At least we've carved out, you know, it's not set in stone, but we've carved out in our minds a 60-40 more to co-ops versus IOUs. And also municipal utilities and co-ops. They're part of that same group because they're considered small utilities.
Okay, well, the money might go further with the co-ops because of their system, but they also have a great need for sure. Thank you, Jackie. You know, unfortunately, we got to move on, but thank you for your participation. And anybody who wants more information about this can contact Jackie at MNERD. And we thank them for being the state energy office and for taking the first step on this and for including the PRC in the conversation. You know, I mean, it really helps when we know what our sister agencies are doing.
May I do 2 more slides?
Yeah, sure. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were
That's
finished.
Okay. Well, actually, I'll be real quick. We're going to ask for a funding match for the first year to the legislature. That's in our budget, just so you know. One of the things we want to do to look forward is to develop a streamlined application because we don't want people to have to hire staff to ask for the money. So our goal is to have a streamlined application. We also want to do some webinars on the federal requirements of federal money that is going to flow down to our sub awardees. And then touching on your data slide there, we're thinking about how can we develop, use our GIS capacity to develop some tools to really understand what's going on at the service territory level. And that does require data. So I'm glad you brought that up. And then regarding our grid modernization, our existing grant program that was established as Mike D told us under the grid modernization grant program or law of 2020, we are at the point of formally doing a rulemaking now, and we're basically going to codify the things that we've had in our requests for applications over the last year. Hopefully clarifying some things and then setting a firm annual solicitation date. And if you'd like any of that information, you can find that on our website. And hearing on November 30th.
Oh, great. Terrific. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for jumping ahead, but we have two utilities to talk with. I believe Laura Sanchez is going to represent PNM. And just, you know, sorry to truncate it, but kind of like, you gave us some really good information. I mean, you know, PNM's response to our
bench request was like 20 pages long with a lot of information, and that's where I learned about the tax credits. So kind of how do you translate that into actual projects and requests for money? And if you could unmute yourself.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much for having us, first of all, and allowing us time on the agenda. So my name is Laura Sanchez, and I am the Chief Policy and Legal Advisor at PNM. I report directly to Don Terry, our COO and president. And I've also been, so in addition to being the project manager on the grid modernization effort that we've had recently that resulted in the plan that was filed, the application that was filed earlier this month, or last month now, I guess, time flies. I'm also the person that's tasked at the company with monitoring the IIJA opportunities and determining sort of what kind of effort we will put together for anything that may come up. And that includes reaching out to other potential partners as we apply for or potentially apply for anything. So this effort and this particular workshop is right in my wheelhouse. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk about this. And I just want to briefly mention, there's 3 other people on the call today with us or on the screen with us. And that's Larry Morris, who's the Director of Tax Compliance for PNM. He helped a lot on the IRA portion of this and would be happy to answer questions if any come up. John I'm going to mess up your name, John. John Verhill. I'm so sorry. Corporate counsel. He's new to our attorney staff. And then Brian Buffington, who of course all of you know, he's our senior project manager, and he's been working with us on GridMod, the GridMod filing, as well as these workshops. So, and thanks, Art, for that shout out as far as our filing goes. We did put a lot of time into trying to be as comprehensive as we could be with the information we have right now from the feds. So what we do know, and I want to commend Jackie for all the information that she put together. It's so difficult, as you all know, to distill a lot of this information that comes out from different sources, from the feds, you know, from industry groups, whatever, and be able to put it into a comprehensive narrative or chart or anything to be able to share with stakeholders. So I think she did a great job on that. As far as our efforts go, we're still monitoring, of course, what's going on with the DOE right now. As we mentioned in our comments, we are in particular looking at the grid resilience and reliance funding that right now is available, or we anticipate will be available to utilities in 2 programs. One of which sort of has a cap to it. You can only apply up to the amount that you've spent in the past 3 years on grid resilience efforts. That one doesn't make as much sense for us because, of course, we're looking to greatly expand our investment in this area. So, so that one would probably not likely be the one we would try to apply for. The other one seems to have more opportunity to be able to apply for funding, and of course, this is all in an effort to try to offset costs to our customers. We believe that the application that we filed is pretty comprehensive and includes a lot of the different elements that could fit into some of what the DOE is anticipating issuing funding on. So right now we're still waiting on them to issue the original or the first request for information. And as many of you know, if you read our comments and have been following this, it looks like the cadence they're following is they're issuing a request for information where parties are encouraged to provide comments. I'm sorry, that's actually already occurred. And the comments that were due back were due October 14th. And that was for the 3 different programs that the 2 that the utilities are able to apply for, and the one that states or public utilities can apply for. And we did submit some comments, although they were pretty minimal, to DOE for them to consider. One thing in particular that we did highlight in those comments, and I'm happy to share with folks after this what our comments were, but in particular on the funding that's available to utility commissions, their DOE, it looks like, is going to expect that commissions or any other coalition of public entities that apply for that funding, that they have to supply 50% match, a 50% match to those funds. And our comments were that that seems unreasonable, especially when the state portion of it, as far as the state share, is 15%. Public utility commissions, especially our public utility commission, has even less funding in some cases because they don't have the same sort of funding mechanisms that the state would have necessarily, or the ability to access other funding. So we really felt like it was important to be able to bring more resources to New Mexico, in particular for planning and so forth to the commission, if that matching amount was lowered to something like 15%. But we felt like 50% match was kind of unreasonable. As far as our plans, though, we expect that we will, as soon as we have information from the FOA, which is the funding opportunity announcement, when that comes out, which is expected by the end of the year, we would evaluate quickly, make sure that we're still on board with submitting some kind of an application. From all the information we've gathered, it's more beneficial to, or you're more likely to get selected if you apply in a coalition format, so that you have multiple parties that are applying for the opportunity. So we would, of course, reach out to a variety of interested parties that would want to join with us. And by that, I mean, it could be educational institutions, labs, it could be potentially the commission in some format, the state. I mean, it's just, I don't think there's a limitation necessarily, but practically speaking, there could be some limitations, especially when we're talking about just the regulatory environment and the commission being, obviously regulating PNM. So we wouldn't necessarily be on the same application, but we certainly could share information about where we're heading with some of our plans with regard to those applications. So again, DOE would be issuing the FOA, and then the FOA would be, what they're doing now is they're asking for concept papers. These concept papers have to be submitted within a certain amount of time, and then DOE evaluates those papers and then invites parties to apply for those opportunities. So it isn't, it's a little bit different than they did with the with ARA, the American Recovery Reinvestment Act, back in 2009. They didn't have that sort of first round of concept papers, but I think the hope is that at least they will hopefully be able to narrow it into something that's a little more tangible, a little more baked, so that they have a better opportunity to sink their teeth into an application that addresses the criteria they're looking for. The other important takeaway for us is that if you, from what I understand, if you apply for funding for grid resilience, for example, through the state, then you're not supposed to apply through the feds. And so for us, we would be looking to apply for one or the other. And I think at this point, just given the level of investment and the potential for grants, we're looking probably at the DOE investments more so, which means that potentially we wouldn't necessarily be in competition with local folks that would be applying for the funds here. But we still, of course, just being part of New Mexico, being the largest investor-owned utility, we want to be part of the conversation, be helpful wherever we can be, and make sure that we collectively do what we can to bring some resources from the federal level back home to New Mexico. So I don't want to take a lot of time with details because there's a lot out there I could talk about. But I'm happy to answer questions, Art, and hopefully that's enough of a just quick overview of where we are with things.
Thank you so much, Laura. Does anybody have any clarifying questions for Laura? I do want to give Brooke a second shot at talking to us about Excel's how they're viewing these opportunities, and then we'll have some time to talk. But I talked too long before, so kind of we're probably going to go beyond 3:30 a little bit. Any clarifying questions? No. All right, back to Brooke.
Thanks, Art. Thanks, Laura. I think you covered the process really well there. So I'll just keep my comments brief on the federal funding piece. Art, we had Catherine Valdez teed up to speak with us today, but she has a conflict and needs to hop off. So I'll cover a couple of our points there. She's our Director of Clean Energy Policy for Xcel Energy. So she'll continue to be engaged, of course, with all of our activities in New Mexico. And to the extent we have a workshop like this again, she's more than happy to come back and talk in detail. But, in addition to the things that Laura said around the process, I would just add for Xcel Energy that, the process is now getting going, as we've all noted, and the Hydrogen Hub program is open as well. So concept papers are due Monday for that, and Xcel is participating in the WISH program, or the WISH effort that includes New Mexico. That was originally an MOU between New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming. So just of note, that we are interested in that and supporting that effort from those 4 states. Also on the resilience program side, we are particularly interested in those programs once they're open. Our focus and our emphasis will be on system monitoring and hardening. We're also interested in looking into potential possibilities around wildfire risk reduction, and really focused on advanced communication networks. So we see a lot of potential for some operational improvements with enhanced communication technologies, both for our distribution operations and our transmission operations. But as the commission noticed in our response to the bench request, we also touched on the tax law change components of the Inflation Reduction Act. And I want to spend some time talking about that today, because as we think about the clean energy transition and we think about what some of the federal incentives available are, this piece of legislation was really impactful for the industry. It was really impactful for utilities, and it was really impactful for developers. So with us today is Xcel Energy's Vice President of Tax, Pete Mathiasen. Pete's in our Minnesota office, but he's joined us today, and appreciate the commission enabling virtual participation. So Pete's going to give us an overview of the IRA, and he's going to talk about some of the areas where Xcel Energy sees particular customer benefit. And we thought this would be a really good opportunity to share our perspective and some of this information with the commission. So Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Brooke. And just to be clear, I'll go through some initial comments at a pretty high level on what the Act provides, and try to leave some time that at least a little bit of time for some Q&A to the extent there are questions. It's as most of you know, the IRA is a huge legislative package passed in August. It's the largest federal tax package addressing climate change that we've ever seen. At a high level, sort of the headline is they reinstated a 10-year extension of the production tax credits and investment tax credits for renewable energy. They reinstated those at the original full value prior to the most recent phase outs of those credits. That's important to have. I say at least a 10-year extension because there's a good chance that just based on the way that the phase outs will work on the back years of this 10-year period, that period will extend out much further than 10 years. So that's important. It provides credit certainty to investors, to developers, to customers, to regulators as we plan these investments. And obviously, development of these projects takes a lot of time. The Act also includes some things that perhaps sweeten the credits that are provided, and they provided a couple of adders, and those adders really are carrots that relate to reinvesting in energy communities and incentivizing sourcing the content for renewable projects within the U.S. The bill also includes inclusion of several other technologies beyond just wind and solar. So incentivizing companies to look further than just traditional wind and solar that we have now. So there are new credits for hydrogen production, a production tax credit related to that. There's a new standalone battery storage credit, which is important as we integrate more and more renewables onto the system. They reinstated solar PTC that had gone away about 15 years ago that was rarely used at the time. That was an important credit. It based on the efficiency of solar over the past 15 years, switching or providing an option to switch that credit from an investment tax credit, which is based on cost, to a production tax credit, which is based on production, just provides overall a greater benefit for customers. So that was a big win. Of course, I think it was touched on earlier that the package reinstates the electric vehicle credits and provides new charging station credits to incentivize that shift to the electrification of the vehicle fleet. Just to give you maybe just at a real high level, just one sentence really. When you look at the IRA and you look at renewable projects that are being planned in the future, what the IRA does when you compare it to where we are pre-IRA, if you look at a typical wind project, the cost of that wind project is going to be reduced by 50% by the credits that will be provided under this bill. That's significant. For solar, you know, depending on where you're building your solar, obviously the benefits are going to be greater where you have higher capacity factors or availability factors. But we're looking, you know, for utility scale solar savings of at least 30%, if not more, just related to the implementation of this package. So some significant benefits for customers there as we transition the fleet to more and more renewables. And then just one other thing, and it's important that I wanted to touch on. It was something that we advocated hard for, and we've worked on this for many years at Excel and within the industry. But for the first time ever, beginning in 2023, companies are going to be allowed to sell tax credits that they generate into a market. It's new. That market has not been set up. We are currently looking at how those sales will take place. There is some guidance that is going to be needed from Treasury, but we anticipate a market consisting of, you know, entering into agreements with tax credit investors, just much like developers might use tax equity today. In this case, it's just it'll provide a more efficient means of monetizing the tax credits for companies, and those benefits get passed on to customers. So it's a very important part of the package, and it's something that we worked on to say, look, providing all these credits is a great thing, but making them work more efficiently just provides even more benefit for customers and will accelerate that transition.
That's a very interesting aspect, Pete, and thank you so much for bringing that up. I guess that raises the question of, is there something the commission needs to do about that, right? You know, whenever the utility sells off some asset, there is a sharing of the proceeds of the assets between shareholders and ratepayers. I don't know how New Mexico does it. I know California leaned more towards the ratepayers getting it than the shareholders, sometimes exclusively on tax credits in particular. What would Excel see as something that the commission could consider and PNM could add into that as well?
Yeah, I can answer that, Art, and Pete, you can fill in any details, but you know, this isn't selling an asset. This is a production tax credit. So these would be tax credits that the company receives or the utilities receive from the generation of eligible resources. So through utility ownership of these renewable resources, we can, and we have today on the company-owned wind projects that SPS owns, we can pass those PTC savings directly back to customers in our fuel clause or other mechanisms. What we're seeing with the transferability provisions under the IRA is the opportunity to sell those credits as opposed to pass them back to customers, because it reduces other cost components for customers that is in the revenue requirement for those company-owned wind facilities. So while it may sound counterintuitive to not pass the credit back through, say, the fuel clause or whatever mechanism is in place from the commission to return those savings to customers, we can actually generate more savings through the sale and the reduction of other costs as a result of those sales. And so I think, to answer your question, what the commission needs to do is to continue to look into transferability and watch as this, it's not really a, I don't want to overstate it, Pete, it's not really a marketplace as formal as that, but you know, there will be new market participants that can shop for PTCs and engage with owners of projects that can sell those PTCs to them. So I do expect, and I think the company expects, that it'll become pretty liquid pretty fast. And so there's a lot of benefit there, and all of that stands up in 2023 is the expectation. And we can also do it potentially from existing facilities. It'd just be based on their production starting in 2023. So again, from a company-owned renewable perspective, we're going to maximize the savings for customers. That's going to be, you know, our focus, and creating the best tax provisions and cost recovery and rate-making provisions that we can to facilitate the most dollars going back to customers. But again, these aren't assets that we would sell. This is a restructuring of how we essentially pass back that PTC value to customers.
Thank you. If there's a role for kind of like some kind of commission statement in a grid modernization rulemaking about that, we entertain proposals for how to treat that for sure.
Okay.
All right. Laura, did you have anything else that you needed to add or wanted to add?
No, I mean, not on that point in particular, although it does, I think just stepping back from a policy perspective, you know, that whole structure of that conversation definitely, you know, I think at least for me, it makes you sort of think about what are some of the opportunities with regard to utility ownership of some of these, you know, some of the renewable energy projects. And I know that there's sort of always a back and forth there between utility ownership or PPA, but it's definitely, I think there's going to be changes that are coming up that may signal opportunities for customers that could shift a little bit more to utility ownership model being beneficial. But beyond that, I didn't have anything else. I don't know if Larry, who's our tax expert who's on, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add on that last discussion. You're still on.
I apologize. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I think that, you know, I think that they covered that very well. You know, I think the way that we look at the credit transferability and being able to sell credits is really a mechanism to monetize the credits that are already being earned, you know, based on the renewable projects. And so it's not so much about selling a benefit as much as it is about being able to monetize a credit even when the utility, say, is in a net operating loss position and doesn't have taxes payable to offset. The credit would still be able to be utilized, which is a benefit for the utility and for customers. And that was all I had.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, clarifying questions from the audience, from commissioners on this presentation? I find this stuff fabulous because we have never been in this situation where the federal government is so eager to give money away at this level to these particular purposes. I mean, I go back to the ARA, and that was a lot of demonstration projects, which were valuable, and kind of a crapshoot in what was going to be successful or not. I think that certainly what I heard from the White House representative at the NARIC conference was that they're trying to make this as easy as possible to get the information and apply for these funds, but also that there will be a greater level of accountability attached to it. And I think that by providing funds to electric utilities, you'll get that accountability built in, because we always expect our utilities to be accountable, and you know how to do it. So I also want to query, we were hoping to have Representative Lujan with us, and she was on at the very beginning of the program. Can I ask if you are here? I don't see you on our participants list. Representative Lujan?
Art, this is Colin Gillespie. I don't see Representative Lujan. We did have her, and then she dropped off. I can try reaching out, but looks like we're close to the end of our time.
Yeah, we are. And of course, this is the problem with asking a politician who's running for re-election, right, at this particular moment. So that's, I'm sure, is behind it. So with that, thank you all very much for this panel. I find this to be particularly informative and helpful as we're looking down the road on this stuff. We appreciate all the participation. I did have a space here for open public discussion. We don't have a whole lot of time, but I'll just repeat, this is the beginning of a conversation that's structured specifically towards creating a rulemaking. And we appreciate all the time and effort that people have put in so far, participating in the GridWorks webinars. There was a lot of valuable information there, and you could go to GridWorks website. I think that in the chat, there is a link to that. There is a lot of really good presentations on that. And feel free to, keep in touch with us. I mean, we're all leaving. I mean,
Art,
we'll see what happens.
This is Cynthia. Say, Art, I noticed there was a question by Joan Drake in the chat, and I don't know if it got answered, but she said, please address how your recommendations, I don't know what part of the conference, what part of this workshop it was, will affect criteria under 62-8-13.B2 regional connection. Did anybody?
Well, we began to talk about that, Mike D'Antonio, and we did at least represent that transmission is very much a component of this, right? Even though the jurisdiction of the PRC is distribution, that the HB 233 specifically contemplates transmission and better connections with interregional markets as a goal, as a consideration. So this, I would say that it is part of what the commission would be looking at in a project. But honestly, most transmission upgrades would get approved through a organized market planning function or through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and then the allocation of that liability to ratepayers falls to the commission.
Thank you.
Art?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So as an outgoing commissioner, but
very outgoing.
Yeah, very outgoing. We've got two potential commissioners just talking right now. I just say that in terms of the grants and the kinds of programs that are put together, you know, in the past, I've seen all kinds of arguments against putting programs in place because it might not be fair to one group of customers, or one group of customers is benefiting and others are not, therefore we can't do it. I guess my attitude towards that is I would very much like the utilities to feel comfortable asking for lenience on those issues and giving you guys room to try stuff, even if under rules of equity that we've had in the past, it might fall a little bit astray of that. And I'm hoping the commission, when I'm gone, will be flexible enough to look at that stuff. It's always been a bugaboo of mine that in the regulatory environment, it really is kind of a no-win proposition so often for utilities to try to innovate. And I'm hoping the commission can work around that. And I hope that you guys will feel comfortable coming up and asking for waivers when you need them to get out there and try stuff. So just wanted to get that comment in and thank everyone for being here today and joining this discussion.
This is not a dead end. I mean, there's still a lot more to work on. And, you know, I'll just suggest that to the extent that you need to come to the commission to kind of work out these things, come in early, all right, so that we get some input and have some conversation about it, or whoever follows us in this line of remember, these are institutions that are 100 years old, but the work is ongoing. Also, just, you know, make sure to provide, even if you can't monetize the benefits, provide an understanding of where you think the benefits might lay. Because as we talked about in cost benefit analysis, it's really hard to get a handle on the dollar figures associated with those. So, you know, sometimes we can go without kind of like defining a cost benefit analysis that needs to be +1 or greater than 1, as long as there's a movement towards meeting the objectives of the Grid Modernization Act and whatever policies the state puts on top of you, and the sense that the benefits are going to flow to your customers. I think that's really the most important thing going forward. So
agreed. I'll agree with you, Art. I'd like to agree with you.
I'll give anybody else last word.
Thank you all for coming. This has been really productive. I've learned a lot. I hope we can do more of these conversations. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you all very much. And Andrew Stone wants to know if Commissioner Fishman can give us a rendition of Freebird. I think we're going to close.